شكرا جزيلا سيد الرئيس ماكرون لأنك سمحت لنا بالتقدم في هذه الموضوعات وإشراك جميع الأطراف بما ذلك بلدان من أفريقيا. وفي الخاتمة أقول أحيانا من الآن وحتى القمة المناخية الأفريقية في نيروبي في 4 و6 من سبتمبر أيلول مع التنظيم المشترك مع الاتحاد الأفريقي والمفوضية الأفريقية من أجل دعوة الرئيس ماكرون. ستكون متحدثا رئيسيا من أجل المجيء والحديث وحتى الوصول إلى مؤتمر الأطراف 28. التقدم المحرز هنا هو تقدم كبير. أريد أن أقول لك فخامة الرئيس ماكرون أنت قلت
But we have plenty of time between now and Nairobi. We have like 3 months. As I told you yesterday, the UN Charter was negotiated in 2 months. I also said that the Bretton Woods institution where Kristalina and Ajay are working, they were negotiated in a little village, a little town called Bretton Woods in 1945, in 3 weeks. We have a lot of time between here and Nairobi, and between Nairobi and COP28, we can fix this, and it can happen for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Ruto. I will now give the floor to Secretary Yellen. Janet.
Thank you, Mr. President, and let me begin by thanking you and the French delegation for hosting this summit and for your tremendous hospitality. This summit is an important milestone in our effort to evolve the global financial architecture to be more responsive to the tremendous challenges and opportunities facing us. And the last 2 days have made me optimistic about the progress we've made so far and the momentum that I believe can carry us forward in the coming months. I'd like to touch on our progress in 3 areas that I've focused on during my time here at the summit. First, our initiative to evolve the multilateral development banks, or MDBs. Global challenges like climate, pandemics, and fragility and conflict are putting development gains at risk. That's why I called for the evolution of the development banks last fall to tackle these global challenges with sufficient speed and scale. Our goal is to strengthen the MDB's work on eradicating poverty and supporting sustainable growth, their traditional goals, not distract from them. We've made significant progress on the MDB Evolution Initiative with a broad coalition of shareholders. And our coalition has made preliminary updates to the World Bank's mission and its operating model. We're unlocking as much as $50 billion in additional lending capacity over the next decade. And our estimate is that the MDBs as a whole system could unlock $200 billion in new lending capacity over the same time frame, and that's through balance sheet measures that are either already under implementation or being deliberated. Now, that by itself would be a very significant achievement. We could have $200 billion in lending capacity that we didn't have before to invest in some of the most pressing problems facing the world: combating climate change, lifting people out of poverty, preparing for future epidemics, and much more. But the evolution is not just about the balance sheet. It's about making sure we use these resources in a more impactful manner. So we're pushing for additional reforms on a rolling basis. And this includes work to optimize our climate finance architecture. Second, let me turn to debt and macroeconomic stability. The IMF plays an important role in providing policy advice and technical assistance, along with critical financing. We've had constructive discussions about ensuring that the IMF can continue to provide concessional lending now and in the longer term. And we call on the IMF to present all available options to put its poverty reduction and growth facility on a sustainable footing in the near term by the annual meetings. And we also call for a broad range of donors to meet the IMF's financing targets for the trust. Now, we also need to complete outstanding debt cases. Debt is a global challenge, and it requires urgent cooperation from all creditors. To that end, I'm pleased that all official bilateral creditors have reached consensus to move forward with the debt treatment for Zambia under the leadership of the Chinese and French co-chairs. And I just saw Premier Li at the high-level panel, and I'm encouraged that China is moving to help address the debt challenges facing developing countries. Beyond resolving outstanding cases, a productive first step to provide greater certainty and timeliness to the debt process would be the publication of a guide to the common framework for borrowers. Third concerns private capital mobilization. As we announced earlier this morning, the Investor Leadership Network, which includes companies with a total of over $10 trillion in assets under management, has launched a new commitment to accelerate pension fund and institutional investments in emerging and developing economies over the next 3 years. And the United States will work closely with them to facilitate investments in the critical areas of energy transition and sustainable infrastructure. I also continue to believe that MDBs should launch a set of more innovative tools to boost private capital mobilization. And that is a priority shared by many leaders of these institutions, like President Bonga. We've already taken significant complementary action. Through the G7, we seek to mobilize $600 billion for high-quality infrastructure investment through the public and private funds over 5 years. And the United States has already achieved $30 billion of its $200 billion commitment. And through initiatives like the JETPs, or Just Energy Transition Partnerships, we're bringing public and private sources of funding together to provide tens of billions of dollars to fight climate change and spur economic development in emerging economies. Well, the challenge to the world that has brought us here to Paris is to make sure the global financial architecture can orient the necessary finance toward the essential tasks of eradicating poverty, combating climate change, and building a global economy that allows people and the planet to thrive. There's a great deal of work to do, and I look forward to working with the leaders on this stage and many more to advance our shared efforts. Thank you again, Mr. President, for your leadership.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Secretary Yellen. Now I will give the floor to Kristalina Georgieva for the IMF. Merci beaucoup, Kristalina, une fois encore d'être à Paris.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. We had a very engaged and frank discussion, and it is so very important that we did. Our world is changing rapidly. It is affected by more frequent and severe shocks, and it is a world with more tensions than we need at this time. We need each other the most today. Our economy has proven resilient despite of the shocks we experienced, COVID, the war. but it hasn't been without a cost. Interest rates are up, debt burdens are rising, the cost of living is high, poverty and inequality are increasing, and the consequences of the climate crisis are upon us, and they hit the hardest poor people and poor vulnerable countries that have done the least to cause this problem. So it is time to step up. It is time for leadership. And President Macron, President Ruto, Secretary Yellen, my dear brother Ajay, we have to live up to the expectations that are put on us. I want to talk about 3 topics that are directly relevant to our work in the IMF that have been high on the agenda in these 2 days. First, debt. I completely agree with President Ruto that it is a top priority to ease the debt burden on countries, especially those who have been hit by exogenous shocks, countries with good governance, but suffering from these shocks terribly. We have made progress. We do have now the common framework delivering for Chad, for Zambia, and also countries outside of the common framework, Sri Lanka, Suriname, benefiting from bringing creditors, public and private, together. We recognize we have to accelerate that restructuring, make it predictable, timely, and providing breathing space to debtor countries through debt suspension during negotiations. This is what we have been advocating for. We now have the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable that brings, for the first time in the last decades, traditional Paris Club creditors, non-Paris Club creditors, China, India, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and the private sector, together with the debtor countries. And I heard this call yesterday. So President Ruto, you're here representing countries. I can turn to you and say, yes, sir, this is being done. We have to go beyond that. We have to recognize debt and climate are correlated and will be even more so. And therefore, we need to work on debt for climate swaps. The World Bank takes leadership on debt suspension clauses in their programs. At the IMF, we have an instrument called Catastrophe Containment and Relief Trust that allows us to provide directly debt relief to poor countries when they're hit by shocks. We used it in the past. We used it mostly for COVID. We are determined to use it for climate shocks as well. And talking about climate, let me turn to the second area directly relevant for our work. The IMF has, over the last years, integrated climate considerations in everything we do, because climate is macro-critical. We integrate it in fiscal policy, in monetary policy, in data, and of course we also have a financial instrument. Let me stress one area where the IMF has been tirelessly promoting action, and it is on carbon price. Our analysis shows that without carbon price, there is no chance, no flying chance, that we will meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius target by 2030. We will miss it. So we need to have this incentive in place. We advocate for inclusive approach that is including tax, but also trade and also regulatory actions, as long as they deliver trajectory on, in the right direction, up on carbon price. We propose a carbon price floor that is fair, Poor countries pay less, middle-income countries more, rich countries, of course, they have the highest price. And then I agree with you, there is space to think of international deployment of some of these resources. We are not there yet, but there is movement. We were, just 5 years ago, covering 17% of emissions. Now we cover 25%. There is only 75% more to go. But with will, when there is will, there is way. And talking about financing, this is the third area very relevant for the IMF. We have created a new instrument, the Resilience and Sustainability Trust. First time in the history of the IMF, we provide long-term, affordable financing, 20 years repayment, 10.5-year grace. How did we fund it? We funded it with the goodwill on countries like France, and we look forward to the US contributing, that have taken part of their new SDR allocations, and per the promise made, they have made this available to the IMF to provide us affordable lending. We have reached the commitment, the pledge made in 21, the pledge of 100 billion. 60 billion of this pledge is already working at the IMF in the Poverty Reduction and Trust Fund and in the Resilience and Sustainability Trust. And I can tell you it makes a difference. We issued 2 press releases here for Barbados and for Rwanda, how this money, in partnership with the World Bank Group, with the Inter-American Development Bank, with national development banks, based on analysis provided by our sister institution, how it makes a difference in accelerating the green transition, bringing more ability for countries to face the challenge, to adapt to the challenge of climate change. So we have 7 countries that have benefited. You are on the queue. Kenya is on the queue. We have 40 countries expressing interest. And because of that, I want to announce today, we are lifting up our ambition to increase by 50% the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, so we don't have to ration financing and we can respond to needs. I want to finish with the following. When I started in my job, the first thing I did was to go to the Bretton Woods, in this beautiful hotel, and to sit in the room, a very small room, where it all happened. Only 44 countries at that time. By the way, all delegations led by men. Most of them came by boat. Since then, the number of countries more than doubled in the world. The number of people more than tripled. And the global GDP increased more than 10 times. It is a different world. And obviously, we have to change. We have been changing as the world changes. And I completely and totally commit to changing for the future with you, with our members. And today, yesterday, we got impetus for what it means to change, to be more inclusive, more representative, well-resourced, and with serving with professionalism and empathy our members. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristalina. And now I will give the floor to Ajay Banga. Thank you, Mr. President, and welcome. I think it's a great chance for all of us to have you here now.
Thank you very much. And it's, first of all, Mr. President, I want to thank you for your engagement and your inclusivity, and I think most importantly, your willingness and courage to take on doing something like this. You and your team deserve a lot of credit for that, so thank you. I've been 3 weeks in this job, and as President Ruto said, 3 weeks was how long it took to create the Bretton Woods, so I have a feeling I've been in the job long enough, and 3 weeks means my honeymoon is over. And It's an institution I've long admired. I knew, and I came into this job with my eyes wide open of the challenges that we'll be being asked to work on. I think the evolution roadmap is only the beginning of them. There's so much more to be done. So I get that. And I think that what changed and what changes for me is that when I'm with people who believe that our challenges are appropriate, are opportunities, and they come to the problem with some kind of infectious optimism, then I kind of feel like if we all come together, we will succeed. And to me, the biggest challenge we have is that the global south, as we call it, has more young people than any other part of the world as a percentage of their population. And let's not forget that half those people are women and girls. And therefore, in those two sets of people, women and young people, we have the possibility of our future, the dynamism and the hope of our opportunities for our children and our grandchildren. The problem is that only works if they have quality of life, as I said in a panel with you, Mr. President, when they're growing up, meaning health, education, clean air, clean water, energy, things we take for granted in this where we live. But also when they grow up, jobs. Jobs are the single best way to drive a nail into the coffin of poverty. It is the single best way. And so driving growth and driving jobs is what we have to focus on. And I think as part of redefining our mission and our vision to what Secretary Yelling was referring to, my view is that the World Bank's vision has to evolve to say, yes, we will create a world free of poverty, but on a livable planet. And a livable planet meaning we tackle climate, pandemics, fragility, unnecessary wars, things that make food security, things that reduce our ability to have quality of life and to have hope and optimism. I also believe that this vision is threatened by these intertwined crises, these exact same issues that create the challenge for livability. So I think time is of the essence. Frankly, we are at a critical time in the arc of humanity and our planet. And not having a sense of urgency about the need to scale and replicate things that work would be a travesty of justice. Even if we were to have enough money to do it well, if we don't urgently do so with scale, then we are letting down every single stakeholder in our institution. So I want to be practical on three things that we've announced here. I felt, President Macron, that you indicated you wanted tangible things. So let me cover those three over the last 24 hours. The first one is a comprehensive catastrophe toolkit, an approach that significantly expands our toolkit for crisis preparedness, for response, and for recovery. So how are we doing this? We're going to help governments build advanced emergency systems so they can be ready to respond on day one. Provide new types of insurance that will backstop development projects, allowing work to get back on track quickly. We've actually had these bonds out now in Peru and Jamaica, and the idea is to scale and replicate them to other parts of the world. To give countries new flexibility to quickly redirect a portion of their funds for emergency response so cash is immediately accessible. And offer a pause in debt repayments so countries can focus on what matters and not worry about the bill. And we're looking to embed catastrophe insurance in our lending products with the intent that those insurance premiums and interest will be covered through the generosity of others. And that would ultimately give countries recovery resources without adding to their debt, something that William has referred to now a few times over the last 2 days, appropriately so. When catastrophes occur, leaders are concerned about their people and their communities, giving them water, food, power, and they're really quite devastated by the loss of life. What they don't need at that time is a hand in the face. They need to feel the hand of people like the World Bank on their back. That is what we are trying to do. We recognize that one size does not fit all. That's why it's a comprehensive toolkit and approach, but I think this can be a big step forward. The second, which you helped me actually launch, Mr. President, was the Private Sector Investment Lab. We all know that trillions are required annually to address these challenges, and I know that development banks or even the generosity of governments and philanthropies cannot provide the resources we need. And so therefore, we need the private sector. We all say that, but the truth is our efforts over the years have now come nowhere near what we need to be showing as an output. That's why we're trying a new approach. We're trying to create this private sector investment lab, a concrete step which is designed to identify and remove the barriers preventing private investment in the emerging markets. I described it with you, Mr. President, as creating a railroad on which the private sector can run its rail cars. If we can create that railroad with standardized sort of methods, then we can do a good job with this. The lab will put an emphasis on scaling transition finance. The initial focus is renewable energy and sustainable energy infrastructure. Most importantly, and this is really important to me, the idea is to get ideas, not reports, not videos. Every month when we meet, we will receive 1 or 2 ideas from them. We will work them. If they work, that's good. If they don't, we call them a failure and move on. But over the course of a year, if we get 6 ideas that work, we win. And that's what we're trying to get to. So as you know, sir, Mark Carney and Shriti Vadera are helping to be co-chairs of this work. They're going to announce a whole composition of the group in the coming couple of weeks. I'm very grateful to both of them for taking this on. And then the last part is our climate outcome measurement. As many of you know, we've been telling part of the climate story. We focus on how many dollars we put in, not what we are getting out. So that's why what we're doing now is to kick off a new initiative with other multilateral development institutions to reimagine a way to track climate outcomes, one that pivots from mostly measuring the volume of dollars spent on climate to actually primarily measuring the impact of our financing, greenhouse gases reduced, cleaner water provided, and so on. The ultimate goal is to launch a new climate outcome platform later this year at COP28. But that work started here in Paris yesterday at the Finance in Common meeting, again chaired by you. We have a lot of work to do. These are just 3 road marks along the way. I'm very conscious of immediate issues like the debt crisis. Kristalina and Secretary Yellen spoke to it. I think progress with Zambia is excellent. The challenges, we've got a whole lot of others to work on, and we need to get that sense of urgency into it. I'm very grateful for the opportunity, sir, to be here for my first meeting of this type, and for you to give me a platform, but even more importantly, for the hand I feel on my back from you as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ajay. Merci beaucoup. Pour conclure, ces 2 jours de travaux nous ont permis en effet d'avancer sur un agenda nourri et de bâtir ainsi un nouveau consensus pour les peuples et la planète. Ce consensus, je l'ai détaillé et tenter d'en rendre compte à l'issue de la réunion plénière que nous venons de tenir. Je ne vais donc pas ici le répéter. Nous demandons à l'ensemble des délégations de pouvoir l'endosser dans des termes intelligibles par tout le monde et pas des langages techniques. Et donc ça n'a pas vocation à être un communiqué équivalent au G7, au G20, mais bien un document de réflexion politique commune et une série d'actions que nous actons aujourd'hui. Plusieurs ont été ici évoquées et qui sont finalisées, en particulier la nouvelle feuille de route et les mécanismes de coordination entre la Banque mondiale et le FMI, qui sont une étape importante, mais également une série d'objectifs avec des rendez-vous et des choses très concrètes qui ont été demandées par beaucoup et qui vont en quelque sorte structurer le chemin vers une réforme plus en profondeur et indispensable de notre architecture et gouvernance financière internationale. Et donc l'objectif est de pouvoir avoir ce consensus de Paris pour les peuples de la planète que nous avons acté à travers nos discussions d'hier et d'aujourd'hui, et de pouvoir suivre ainsi les travaux. Nous allons élaborer une structure permanente de suivi et de pouvoir, d'ici à 2 ans, ici même, en rendre compte par un sommet des résultats et du rendez-vous sur la base de ce que nous avons lancé. Il a vocation surtout, et c'est pour ça que nous l'avons bâti en intimité avec les présidences actuelles et à venir du G20, à structurer les travaux du G7 et du G20 dans les années qui viennent. Et c'est aussi pour cela que plusieurs membres éminents étaient là. Et je remercie la secrétaire Yellen à nouveau de son implication et des bonnes réflexions que nous avons conduites avec ce qui est en cours à Washington. Vous l'avez compris, ce ne sont pas simplement des mots, ce sont des réponses concrètes, c'est un mécanisme de suivi et un rendez-vous au maximum d'ici 2 ans, mais avec des étapes intermédiaires importantes et un changement en profondeur. Ce mécanisme a vocation à, là aussi, inclure très largement, car le président Ruto l'a rappelé, c'est l'objectif qui est le nôtre, avec l'ensemble des gouvernements, mais également des populations civiles. Je voudrais faire simplement 2 remarques conclusives, une remarque et des remerciements. Une remarque pour dire que je crois que la force de ce sommet a été de réunir ici un peu plus de 40 chefs d'État et de gouvernement, pays membres du G7, grands émergents, pays les plus pauvres, pays nouvellement touchés par le changement climatique et ayant fait l'expérience de la vulnérabilité venant de toutes les régions du globe. Et la discussion a été très libre, en séance plénière aujourd'hui, dans le dîner hier, avec des interpellations, des critiques, mais je crois que c'est la condition pour bâtir l'unité de réponse. Et ce qui est clair, je le dis avec beaucoup de lucidité et de gravité, c'est que, je dirais par sa méthode même, ce sommet a vocation à bâtir l'unité de la communauté internationale derrière les réponses qu'on peut apporter à ces défis jumeaux que sont la lutte contre les inégalités et le combat pour la planète. Si nous échouons, nous irons à coup sûr vers une fragmentation de nos institutions internationales. Celles qui existent seront progressivement délégitimées par les plus pauvres et les émergents et aidées en cela par des intentions plus ou moins louables de ceux qui peuvent avoir l'argent et les y aider. Mais cela adviendra. Et donc je pense que notre responsabilité est de maintenir cette unité au service de nos principes et des biens communs que nous avons redéfinis. Enfin, je veux ici remercier toutes celles et ceux qui ont rendu possible ce sommet. Évidemment, les chefs d'État et de gouvernement, le secrétaire général, mon représentant personnel, ainsi que leurs équipes, les équipes de l'Élysée qui ont été fortement mobilisées, mais aussi les ministres présents et leurs équipes les plus proches, comme leurs administrations, qu'il s'agisse du Quai d'Orsay comme de Bercy, qui ont hautement contribué à la discussion de tous ces textes, comme évidemment l'Agence française de développement, la BPI et plusieurs autres structures. Je veux également remercier le Forum de Paris sur la paix et ses équipes qui ont également fortement aidé, et l'ensemble des organisations non gouvernementales ainsi que des représentantes et représentants de la société civile. En effet, nous avons pris l'engagement, il a été tenu, que 50% des délégations et la moitié des délégués invités viennent de tous les continents, mais surtout viennent de la société civile. Et donc je veux remercier toutes les ONG qui ont rendu cela possible, qui se sont mobilisés, les représentantes et représentants de la société civile et en particulier de la jeunesse. L'une d'entre elles s'est exprimée hier en ouverture et qui ont largement alimenté la plateforme de notre sommet, le site et tout ce qui a été mis en place par son secrétaire général. Ils seront aussi dans la durée associés au mécanisme de suivi. Je ne serai pas plus long. Je veux maintenant surtout qu'on puisse prendre les 3 questions qui sont prévues.
Merci Monsieur le Président. Nous allons en effet prendre une question pour la presse française, une pour la presse américaine et la presse kenyane. Donc pour la presse française, la première question. Merci.
Bonjour à toutes et tous. Christelle Méral, France Télévisions. Première question s'adresse d'abord au président français et au président kényan. En quoi ce sommet peut convaincre les pays du Sud de s'engager davantage contre la Russie pour la guerre en Ukraine? Et puis, autre point, la taxe internationale sur le transport maritime. Il avait été beaucoup question avant ce sommet. Alors, Monsieur le Président Macron, il semble qu'il y a eu peu d'avancées sur ce point. Pourquoi est-ce qu'il n'y a pas a priori de consensus? Et est-ce que cela remet en cause cette taxe? Et puis, enfin, je m'adresse à Madame la secrétaire d'État, Janet Yellen. Pourquoi, a priori, les États-Unis ne sont pas favorables à cette taxe? Je vous remercie.
Pour être très direct sur votre première question, l'objectif de ce sommet n'était pas de convaincre les pays qui auraient des doutes ou autres de se mobiliser davantage ou différemment sur l'Ukraine. Et je pense que si on s'y prenait comme ça, ce serait le meilleur moyen de plutôt nourrir la défiance. Il y a d'ailleurs eu une initiative africaine qui a été conduite, dont nous avons parlé, et plusieurs chefs d'État qui étaient présents ont partagé leurs conclusions, à la fois en Russie et en Ukraine. Je crois que l'objectif, c'est précisément de continuer de bâtir l'unité géopolitique qui peut être menacée par les conséquences directes et indirectes de l'agression russe en Ukraine, et donc de préserver l'unité de l'ensemble des États de la planète, qu'ils soient en développement, émergents ou les plus riches, derrière un agenda commun, et de rappeler que, évidemment, la guerre continue de nous occuper, structure nos agendas et nous mobilise, mais elle ne doit pas, si je puis dire, réduire notre engagement collectif pour servir les biens communs qui sont au cœur de notre agenda international. Le climat, la biodiversité, la lutte contre les inégalités au premier chef, avec derrière l'éducation, la santé et plusieurs autres éléments. Et donc ce sommet en soi avait une très grande pertinence à cet égard. Et je pense que sur tous ces sujets, nous ne pouvons les régler qu'en ayant toute la communauté internationale, c'est-à-dire la Chine, les États-Unis, les grands émergents, les pays du G7, les pays du G20, mais également les pays en développement et les pays les plus pauvres. C'est l'objectif et l'intérêt de ce sommet, et je crois que c'était son utilité. Pour ce qui est de la taxation, je suis favorable à une taxation internationale finançant les efforts que nous avons à faire en matière de lutte contre la pauvreté et en matière de climat. J'ai eu l'occasion de le rappeler, la France s'est appliquée à elle-même 2 taxes précédemment proposées, celle sur les billets d'avion d'une part, celle sur les transactions financières d'autre part. Mais vous conviendrez avec moi qu'une taxe internationale est une taxe internationale quand elle est adoptée par tous. Et il en est des taxes internationales comme jadis du socialisme, ça ne fonctionne pas dans un seul pays. Et donc, nous sommes déjà à la frontière technologique. Donc on ne va pas continuer de se faire mal tout seul. On va simplement obliger les uns les autres à nous suivre et mobiliser. Donc nous sommes favorables à une taxe internationale sur le transport maritime parce que c'est un secteur qui n'est pas taxé. Et il n'y a aucune raison qu'il ne soit pas taxé et qui ne contribue pas aux efforts partout sur la planète. Et donc je pense que c'est une très bonne cause. L'objectif ici était de continuer à mobiliser. On a un club de ceux qui pensent comme nous, et c'est à l'Organisation maritime internationale que la négociation doit se tenir, et que nous la tiendrons. Et donc nous défendrons une taxation qui peut être très modique au début, mais parce que c'est un secteur qui certes est en train de se décarboner, d'ailleurs nous l'accompagnons, mais pour lequel il est tout à fait justifié que les revenus qui sont faits, qui sont parfois très importants, fassent l'objet d'une taxation. Simplement pour que ça fonctionne, il faut faire la même chose que ce que nous avons fait sur la taxation internationale minimale, c'est-à-dire qu'il faut avoir justement un ensemble de pays qui nous suivent. Et je vais être très clair avec vous, si la Chine, les États-Unis et plusieurs pays européens clés qui ont aussi des grandes entreprises impliquées ne nous suivent pas, alors vous mettez une taxe en place, mais elle n'a pas d'effet, parce que les gens que vous taxez vont dans les pays qui n'appliquent pas la taxe. Donc il faut vraiment que les pays clés en la matière se mobilisent. Et donc on va continuer de travailler en ce sens, et j'espère que le rendez-vous de juillet à l'OMI sera conclusif en la matière. Président Ruto, la question vous était adressée.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I associate myself with the comments that have been made by Emmanuel Macron, and that this was not a session to coerce anybody to do anything different from, it was a meeting of minds to try and bring consensus the same way we managed to forge a consensus in 2015, is to try and eliminate the tensions that have informed the journey to where we are today, and to see whether we can recreate the consensus that had been built in mobilizing the world towards dealing with the challenge of climate change and international financing architecture. This was not a session to discuss, although all of us are signatories to the UN Charter that respects independence of countries, boundaries of countries. We are all believers in that, and that is why my colleagues from the African continent went to Kiev, went to St. Petersburg, because we believe there can be a peaceful resolution of all conflicts, including those in our continent, in Sudan, in DRC, in Somalia. There is always a way that we can resolve this in a peaceful manner. Our concern, at least those of us from the Global South, and especially in Africa, is the effects the war is having on commodity prices, fertilizer, grain. That's really impacting very negatively on the cost of living. It's also raising concerns to us because of the challenge of energy. Russia having done whatever they did, many countries are going back to fossil fuel. You know, the examples are out there. We are getting reports that maybe the UK is going to switch on their coal plants. I think that's not good for what we are trying to deal with. It's not good for the challenge we are faced with, the existential threat that faces humanity. The moment we engage the reverse gear about the things that we had done and we thought we were making progress, it concerns not just us, but I'm sure it concerns humanity.
Merci beaucoup.
I believe I was asked about the maritime tax, and let me just begin by saying we are very focused on the need to raise substantial additional resources to address climate change and poverty reduction and other global challenges. And so we're very open to innovative approaches, and hopefully we've put some on the table ourselves. I think this is a very constructive suggestion. I think would agree with President Macron's description of the logic of why it would be appropriate, and it's something that the United States will look at.
Merci. Nous allons prendre une question de la presse kenyane.
My name is Wanyonyi Wambilianga from the Standard Media Group in Nairobi, Kenya. To President Ruto, I appreciate you for being the voice of equality on the continent, sitting at the table. My question is, what is the continent bringing to this table, or what role are we going to play in this new normal for us to be considered equal partners? And the second question is to President Macron, are there guarantees that the Bridgetown initiatives will hold where other initiatives have not produced desired results? Thank you.
What is Africa bringing to the table? Let me mention three straight things. Number one, we are bringing our ideas. We've had a very honest but candid conversation around the table. We've had others, but they've also listened to us, because we believe that we do not want anymore to be a continent where people complain, where we are victims, where we are the corner. We believe that Africa can step forward in a very proud way to work with the rest of the world on the challenges we have and provide solutions. We agree, for example, with the suggestions that it could be difficult. Maybe nations, maybe when you talk about national interests, how do you enforce carbon tax? How do you enforce shipping tax? How do you deal with financial transaction tax? I mean, they are legitimate concerns. But I dare say, those who met in that little room in Bretton Woods had as difficult choices to make as we have today. But they didn't walk away from it. They forged a consensus. I think in the world we live in today, there is a lot more creativity, there is a lot more innovation. Technology can give us the opportunity to levy this tax, raise the resources, and be able to give as many, including the third issue I want to say, what Africa is bringing. We are the continent with the largest renewable energy reserves, whether it is wind, solar, geothermal, hydro. How are we going to raise the resources to unlock the huge potential in our continent? It is by having this kind of candid conversation. It is by bringing our ideas on how we can be creative, how we can be innovative, how we can leverage on technology so that we can raise the requisite resources to unlock the Hinga Dam that is giving us nightmares, which can provide electricity to 15 countries. We still have 600 million Africans who do not have access to electricity, 900 of them without access, 900 million of them without access to clean cooking energy. We need the scale of the resources that we are discussing and to democratize the raising of those resources so that it becomes a lot more easier to make decisions going into the future. So finally, let me say, Africa is coming with ideas. We are coming with our resources. We have the largest renewable energy resources. 2/3 of the world's arable, uncultivated arable land is in our continent. We have the youngest population in the continent. These are assets that Africa is coming to the table with so that we can provide an outcome that is win-win, contributed by everybody.
Yes. I cannot agree more with President Ruto, and I just want to say that the Brescian initiative was a very good complement to this agenda and what is good for Africa and important, taking into consideration especially all these issues of climate vulnerability. And I think the way we address this issue and we adapted our own rules, because this is the case for governments, but we are doing it as well for Public Development Bank and our multilateral institutions, is the right way to deal with this new risk, and this is, I think, a very good way to proceed. So I'm confident about the outcome and the follow-up of our discussions on this issue.
Nous allons prendre une troisième question pour la presse américaine. If you may state your name and media, please.
Hi, thank you. Victoria Dendrino from Bloomberg News. Two very brief questions. The first one for Secretary Yellen. We heard President Lula over the past hour, I think, and others talk about the need for world trade to, move away from the dollar. And President Macron has spoken about the extraterritoriality of the dollar and the need to reduce dependence. I was just wondering whether you think their concerns are valid, and who stands to gain besides the U.S. from the dollar retaining its reserve currency status. And then maybe for President Macron, very briefly, you talked about the 100 billion pledge for climate finance being met, and that's an amount that several developing nations have questioned. So my question is, what are you planning to do to credibly convince them that this number is coming and it's being spent on the right projects? Thank you.
Well, I did certainly hear President Lula's concerns about dependence of trade on the dollar and a desire to move away from it. And that's a sentiment we've heard from a number of countries for different reasons. Most importantly, the ability that dependence on the dollar gives the United States to levy sanctions on countries that are guilty of enormous abuses, including human rights abuses. But there's a very good reason why the dollar is used so widely in trade, and that's because we have deep, liquid, open capital markets, a rule of law, and long and deep financial instruments that make it safe and convenient. U.S. Treasuries are the world's safest asset, although there is some diversification of reserve assets. Certainly the lion's share countries choose to hold in the dollar. It's not really easy for other countries to replicate that set of advantages, but understand that there is a motive to want to do so.
As for your question, I think I do share these concerns. It was a commitment made in Paris Agreement, and the experts at the opening session of this summit told us that now we were getting this 100 billion climate fund, but it's clear that it was too slow, and we want now a concrete analysis. I mean, you know that the mechanism is a report made every year by OECD, so we have this report and we know approximately who is contributing and not contributing and how it works. But now we need a much structured and precise follow-up in order to make it much more perceivable and agreed. So I do share this concern, and this is why in the conclusions of this summit and the two-pagers, we will ask for a much detailed analysis and assessment process of this climate fund. As for the other package of 100 billion, I do report here that we delivered what we committed to do 2 years ago. France decided to reallocate 40% of its SDRs, and so the 100 billion is committed. 61 are already in the hands of the IMF, and allowed IMF to start with several programs as mentioned by the MD, and we will follow up on that. Thank you. Merci beaucoup à toutes et tous. Ceci clôt cette conférence de presse. Merci.